And Parshas Vaera sounds like the entire Geula process is being rebooted. It's a new start. It's a fresh start. We already had the introduction to Geula. Hashem introducing Moshe. Hashem dispatching Moshe. Hashem remembering Schus Avos in Parshas Shmos. And now it's, I'm going to fix my mic here, now it's Parshas Vaera. And there's a whole new start. Vaera l'Avram al-Yitzchak ve'el Yaakov bekel shakai u'shmi Hashem lo nadati lehem ve'otzeisi es am Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim v'yitziarti osam me'avod asam, the four lashonos of Geula. I will give you the land of Israel, Marashani Hashem. So the reason there's a new start is because Chazal tell us that between Shmos and Vaera, after Moshe was mocked and ridiculed both by Paro and the people because of his failed attempt to redeem them, he fled the scene, retreated to the comfortable safe haven of his father-in-law Yisro, as I mentioned in last week's share, for either 3 months or 6 months. So Vaera really is a new start. 3 months or 6 months later, Moshe returns and Geula is rebooted. But it's an interesting reboot. It's a very theological section. There's a contrast, evidently, between two names of Hashem and what they represent. Shakai, Shin Daled Yud, and Yud Kei Vav Kei. Hashem informs Moshe that the Avot were exposed to Hashem, encountered Hashem solely through Shakai, Shin Daled Yud. Moshe essentially is receiving an upgrade, Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is a more essential name of Hashem. Vaera el Avraham el Yitzchak ve'el Yaakov bekel Shakai u'shmi Hashem lo nodati lohem. So there are two issues I won't delve into. One is, what is the difference between Shakai and Yud Kei Vav Kei? That is a very deep philosophical, theological question, which almost all the Rishonim tackle in Parshas Vaera. What does the name Shakai evoke? What does it Yud Kei Vav Kei evoke? The second question, which is not theological, it's more literary and historical, is it really true that the Avos weren't exposed to Yud Kei Vav Kei? So those are questions I'm not going to address. But assuming the general tonality of the pasuk, namely that Yud Kei Vav Kei is an encounter with Hashem that's beyond, is an extension of the encounter Moshe had at the Sneh. Some people feel that the phrase Eheyeh Asher can be the name of Hashem. So sometimes people say it based on the Gemara in Shavuos, Ekyeh Asher Ekyeh. But it's the same concept, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Eheyeh Asher. So Moshe received a little taste of it, and now he's receiving the full description of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Ushmi Hashem lo nadati lehem, but to you I will. And this begs the question. At this early stage of Moshe's career, before the 40 days and the 40 nights, before the Makos, before the V'aminu b'Hashem uva Moshe Avdo, before, why is he Zocheh to this higher level of Gilui Shechina, this upgraded relationship with the Rebbeinu Shalom? He hasn't accomplished anything yet. And the answer is in the Psukim, and it's latent in the Psukim. Unlike the Avos, who were solitary individuals who discovered Hashem, who constructed families based on the belief of Hashem, who established clans, Moshe has a nation. Moshe will now lead a nation. Leading a nation is a completely different ballgame. It's a completely different set of circumstances, and not just quantitatively because there are more people. Family is family. You fight, you bicker, you disagree, but there's an internal bond, one for one, one for all, loyalty. Sometimes loyalty expresses itself in animosity and hatred and disagreement, but family's family. The people, that's an entirely different story. There's a nation beyond just your family, beyond just your own flesh and bones, your own flesh and blood. And that can be very, very exacting and demanding. And Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, because you have a nation that you will dedicate toward, that means you have a closer exposure and a more direct and intimate relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Namely, the message of the beginning of Parshas Vaera is that our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in direct proportion to our commitment and our love for Am Yisrael. And the Avos couldn't experience Ahavat Am Yisrael because there was no Am Yisrael. Obviously, they loved the Jews and they loved Jewish history and they were committed to Jewish history. Through no fault of their own, they never experienced Ahavat Am Yisrael. They never experienced sacrifice on behalf of Am Yisrael. Moshe does, and Moshe will. And you would think that to be true. You would think that Ahavat Am Yisrael and dedication to Am Yisrael clashes with purity and sanctity, holiness and transcendence. People can sometimes live unholy lives. They have time demands. The commitments and the interactions can be very dreary and very unholy and very pedestrian and very mundane. You want to be holy? Find a room somewhere. Sit and learn all day. An ivory tower. Segregate, insulate, separate, divide. Because too much contact with the common folk and their issues and their concerns will contaminate you, will distract you, will drag you down. Parshas Vaera is redirecting that message. And it's a trend. And it's a theme alert. Because every time that Moshe Rabbeinu commits more self-annihilating, in a self-annihilating fashion to the needs of the Jewish people, we witness his relationship with the Rebbeinu Shalom spiking. Two frozen moments, two milestones in Sefer Shmos, which is our Sefer. Moshe Rabbeinu was spotlighted at Har Sinai. Har Sinai is not just mass revelation, though it is centered upon that, Gilui Shechina, the only time in history that the voice of the Rebbeinu Shalom was heard by millions, not by individuals, to which you can contest. Maybe it was hallucinatory, maybe it was... But this is corroborated by common experience by the millions. But it's also spotlighting Moshe. Hashem tells Moshe, I will come to you privately in the cloud. Ba'avor yishma ha'am b'dabri yimach, so that they witness and hear me speaking directly with you. V'gam b'cha ya'aminu le'olam, and of course the trust and the belief in Moshe is not in Moshe as a person, because he's mortal, but in the concept of rabbinic tradition which Moshe launches. V'gam b'cha ya'aminu le'olam. So all of rabbinic tradition comes from that encounter between Moshe and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which we were privy to, which we stood witness to. So Moshe is spotlighted. We read Moshe ascending the mountain, and Moshe Kibul Torah Misinai, which is the beginning of Pirkei Avos, but if you look at the parallel text in Avos Rabbi Nassan, which is a compendium work, it's a parallel work to Avos, maybe compiled by Rabbi Nassan, maybe not, it's hard to know who compiled it. Moshe Niskadish Ba'anan Shisha Yamim. Moshe first spent 6 days purifying, sublimating, preparing for that encounter with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Har Sinai is Moshe's day, not just Am Yisrael's day. Where does Moshe get all this right to feel HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence and to be there with the Rebbeinu Shalom in that spotlight? Not spotlight in a celebrity fashion, but in that spotlighted, private moment. Which, by the way, if you read Parshas Yisro, is part of the tension. Moshe keeps going up and down because it's Moshe's day, but it's also supposed to be Am Yisrael's day. And essentially, if you read the Psukim in Yisro carefully, Har Sinai begins when Moshe is in midstream going up and down. It's almost as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kivayachal, is staging Moshe's up and down so that he doesn't steal the spotlight. So when Har Sinai begins, he's going up and down. But that's a different story. The answer can be found in the very peculiar beginning of Parshas Yisro, and the very peculiar name of Parshas Yisro. Why in the world is the Parsha that hosts first Gilui Shechina in history, why in the world is it Yisro, and why in the world do we care about Yisro's arrival? And there are many, many answers to that question. But one answer is, we have to see what Yisro sees. And what Yisro sees is, Moshe is committed to the needs of this fledgling people, from day, from morning, from dawn until dusk, to the point that Yisro is worried sick about his son-in-law, and of course his daughter, Navol Tivol, Gamata Gamazar Shemicha. He's worried that Moshe will wilt, and he's right. You have to learn to delegate, because you can't take it all on yourself. And after all, what was Moshe dealing with? They hadn't received the Torah yet. They were searching for religion, they were searching for spirituality, they had certain questions they had to ask. And it would have been very easy for Moshe to dismiss those questions I promise you, they weren't asking him how to understand a machlokas between Rabbi Kiva Eger and Chassam Sofer. They didn't have that level of resolution. They had some ideas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah, but it was general information, general questioning, general, Rebbe, should I do this? Rebbe, should I do that? Frightened, they're in the midbar, they didn't know how to navigate. Would have been very easy for Moshe to be little. He spends time with each person, making them feel centered and focused upon and attended to. Min HaBoker Ad Arif. That's the level of sacrifice that serves as the springboard for Moshe to reach his next level at Har Sinai. Moshe doesn't get to Har Sinai unless you first see him sacrificing on behalf of Am Yisrael and expressing his Ahavat Yisrael. And it happens a few parashiyos later. Because a few parashiyos later, whatever Moshe experienced at Har Sinai is, I want to say pocket change, it's a poor expression for Har Sinai, but Moshe is placed b'nikras hatzur, ani aver kol tivei el ponecha, v'krasi b'shem Hashem lefanecha, v'risas achorai, Hashem Hashem kol rachum v'chanun, harini nas kvodecha, hodi nas derechecha. This is perhaps the singular moment in history in which a human being grasps the maximum that he can of Kodesh Baruch Hu, of the Melech Malachei HaMelachim. Where does he get to that stage? How does he leapfrog to that stage? And the answer is, well, look at the parsha before, where Hashem is so angered and furious at the Jewish people. He says that I will eradicate them, heref mimeni v'ashmideim, and I'll destroy them, and I'll start a new nation with you as its founding father. That's a pretty good offer you can't refuse. But Moshe says, Imayin, if you don't forgive them, I have no interest in my own personal legacy, in my own personal history. I just care about this people. And Hashem essentially tells him, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. You got the right answer, and that is your stepping stone to more Gilui Shechina, because as much as a person can understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu on an individual basis through all the Torah that surrounds me, but by living for the Jewish people, the children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and seeing Hashem through them and loving Hashem through your love, that is a higher madrega of Gilui Shechina, encounter with the Shechina, than you can reach as an individual with all the sanctity and Kedusha that it implies and that it enables. And the same is true that Moshe steps down once he loses even a small element or small part of that Ahavat Yisrael. The sin at the rock in Parshas Chukas is not really about hitting versus speaking. It's the way Moshe spoke to them. According to Chazal, Shim'una Hamorim. Hamorim can mean many words, but it isn't complimentary. Moshe is not saying Rabbosai. Moshe is calling them rebels, recalcitrant, people who self-arbitrators, whatever Morim is. It's not a good term. You don't want to use it in a complimentary fashion. And Chazal tells us that that's Moshe's moment of being deposed and demoted, because you're here because you love the Jewish people. And of course, he was an Ahavat Yisrael, and of course, but any slight shift in that level, in the calibration of Ahavat Yisrael, demotes Moshe Rabbeinu. So the message of Parshas Vaera is that the route to encounter with Kodesh Baruch Hu is Ahavat Yisrael, and that's why Moshe Rabbeinu, who has a Yisrael to be Ohev and to sacrifice for, and if you look a little bit further, the Pesukim Beitzavei Mel B'nei Yisrael, if you Pesukim later, in front of me, Hashem basically tells Moshe, before you become their leader, just know it's going to be hard. Tarchanim, Sarvanim, they're obstinate, they like to nudge you, they have a lot of issues, they're strong-willed. It's not going to be an easy ride. Being a leader of the Jewish people is not a cakewalk. As I walk in the park, are you ready for that level of commitment? When Moshe says yes, well, then he sees more of Hashem. Vaera Avram el Yitzchak Bekel Shakai. Whatever Shakai means, they only receive Shakai, but you see me through Yud Kei Vav Kei. So this is a very, very interesting, provocative, and timely question. And to elaborate the question, and I'll pose the question, and I'll try to be as well-rounded as I can about the question, is what's more important, Ahavat Yisrael or Ahavat HaTorah? My Rebbe Rav Amital, who obviously was speaking primarily to a community of people who believed in religion and Zionism, I hate to use labels, religious Zionists, but people who are both Dati and Sioni, contested what many people influenced by Rav Kook's son believed to be a triangulation of three values, Torah, Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, and Am Yisrael. And that triangle suggests inseparability and indivisibility and indistinguishability. There's no one that comes before the other. My Rebbe Rav Amital believed that those three values could be ordinated in a sequence, and that the sequence of value, of evaluation, reflected the timeline. Namely, first there was an Am Yisrael, Tesvav Nisan. We were born into a nation. 7 weeks later, we received the Torah, Toras Yisrael. And what was meant to be a few weeks later, but ended up being 40 years later, to the detour, we received Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, Rav Amital believed that the timelines reflected the evaluation. And that Eretz Yisrael, in theory, you can make compromises of your commitment or investment in Eretz Yisrael for the sake of Torah and Am Yisrael. Which, by the way, is not something that many people in our community bought into because of the political ramifications of that period, and when obviously no longer viable today. But when there was, at least in many people's mind, a peace option that would lead to a better condition for the Jewish people, many people said, you can't splice Am Yisrael from Eretz Yisrael, and you can't surrender any parts of Eretz Yisrael, even if you thought that it would improve Am Yisrael. Again, it's a theoretical conversation, it's a practical, political conversation, diplomatic conversation. And Rav Amital disagreed. And in the context of Israeli religious Zionist politics, that was a very bold message that not everyone agreed with. But now turning back to the question of Torah and Am Yisrael, if you feel they're a triangle, then again, you can't even begin the conversation. They're so inseparable. You can't have a triangle without three angles. But Rav Amital believed that Ahavat Yisrael was the highest value. And he quoted a Tana de Eliyahu. And I'll read it. I rarely read because I want to make eye contact with the camera, but it's such an important Tana de Eliyahu. Remember, this is from the base matters of Eliyahu. People quoting Eliyahu to his Talmidim of Eliyahu. Again, it was probably written by a Tana, but it's attributed to Eliyahu Hanavi. Amali Rebbe, and presumably this is Eliyahu Hanavi speaking, Shnei Devarim Yesh Ba'olam. There are two things that I love with all my heart. V'ani Ohavim B'levavi, Ahavat Gemura, Torah and Yisrael. And I don't know which is first. And most people feel that Torah is first. Shnei Pasuk in Mishlei Hashem Kanani Rishes Darko. Aval Ani Omer, whoever this Rebbe is speaking, perhaps Eliyahu, Yisrael Kadmu. Yisrael comes before Torah. Shenemar Kodesh Yisrael Hashem Reishis Tvuasa. This is Tana de Eliyahu Parak Yudalad. And I think a lot of people that live in the community that I live in live by this credo and see this in Parshas Vaera. And our commitment to Am Yisrael and its needs, and serving in the army and being part of society with all of the challenges that introduces to our religious experience. Whether it's theoretical because we're introducing other values, whether it's practical because life in the army is corrosive sometimes to religious practice, or it's challenging to religious practice, but the highest value is to commit to your people. And that's how I read Parshas Vaera, and that's how my Rebbe read Parshas Vaera, and that's what I believe is latent in this read of Ahavat Yisrael, Kodem Es Torah. So, to be fair and honest, and many of you, I'm sure, I hope, are listening to this and affiliate with some of the value systems that people attribute to the Haredi world, skipping past the conscription issue, because that's an entirely different issue. And many people on the outside of the Haredi world wonder, well, how can you adopt policies that alienate Am Yisrael, that sever yourself from Am Yisrael? Don't you believe in the Tana de Eliyahu, like I do? And I imagine the answer would be one of three. So if you're listening and this is your approach to life, here's your answer. It's like Aram Arayim, right? Sometimes Abai and Rav have a machlokes, and Abai says, I'll explain my svar and I'll explain your svar. That's what Torah is meant to be, to understand the other side, even though you feel passionate about your side. And here are the three answers that I can tell. Maybe you have a fourth answer. One is, this is not the be-all and end-all. This is a medrash. And everyone makes the mistake of finding the one chazal they like and presenting it as ultimate absolute truth to the exclusion of all else. Chazal spoke in multiple tonalities, and they were human beings just like we were, they had different opinions. So, and of course, Eliyahu Hanavi's sentencing is to be the Ohev Yisrael and to restore Ahavat Yisrael in the end of times, because he was such a kanoi at Har HaCarmel after he disproved and debunked all the Nevei Habal, and he says, Kano Knesi Hashem Lokei Tzavakos, and he starts to condemn the Jewish people and accuse the Jewish people. And Hashem basically removes him, just like in parallel Moshe was removed the second that his Ahavat HaYisrael slipped. So his job is to attend every bris and to affirm Jewish pedigree and to affirm Jewish nation at the night of Pesach, and to arrive before Mashiach and help rebuild Jewish unity. And you could say maybe it's Eliyahu's task, but not our task. And we disagree with this medrash, and I'll find you another medrash. Another answer could be that this medrash, that Ahavat Yisrael, applies when the Yisrael that you want to express your Ahava to are people that are living by the values that you feel underwrite Jewish identity. And if you feel, which not everyone would agree, that people who are no longer living classically halachic lifestyles are no longer fully Yisrael. It's a very, very awkward articulation. But would you be prepared to take actions and policies on behalf of Am Yisrael that may compromise the integrity of your own avodas Hashem at a personal level, your own quote-unquote Torah, when those people of Yisrael are, in your mind, not fully Yisrael? And I'm not saying that people feel that way, but there are extreme positions that once Jews become secular and no longer adhere to Torah mitzvos, then their responses to our behavior, or to the behavior of people that do keep Torah and mitzvos, can't be factored into policy because they're not acting minhag Yisrael. I don't agree with that, but I think a lot of people would say that. And we would adopt a Torah policy that may alienate other Jews and may cause pain or hardship, whatever, but, well, what about Ahavat Yisrael? Just Ahavat Yisrael? And the answer would be, well, we don't have to factor in Ahavat Yisrael when the Yisraelim are not behaving in the way that we think Yisraelis are meant to behave. I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just providing, as best as I can, a well-rounded position. The third option, which I think is also legitimate to stake, is the best thing I could do for Ahavat Yisrael is to study Torah and keep mitzvos, even if on the practical plane it may incite responses from other Jews that are angry and hostile and animus to our positions. But Ahavat Yisrael is looking for a higher plane. If I really love a Jew, then I have to do what's best for that other Jew, even when that other Jew doesn't know it's best for him. And if I believe that learning Torah mitzvos exclusively, even if it incites hostility and opposition from others, is still in their best interest, then I have to be strong enough to take the high road of Ahavat Yisrael, not the, so to speak, low road and common road. And I have to act in a way that's better for Am Yisrael. And what's better for Am Yisrael is Torah mitzvos. That's not the value system that I build my life upon, and that the community that I live in builds our life upon. Rav Lichtenstein would always cite to us the Gemara in Kiddushin that if a person, chas v'shalom, strikes his adult son or teenage son, the father is over, because the son is probably going to strike him back. And the question is, what do you mean? The father is educating his son. It's his responsibility. He's right. The son's wrong. The answer is, you have responsibility not just to assert the correct position and to behave in the correct manner, but to anticipate the response and to try to guard against responses that are inappropriate. And therefore, so much of the religious Zionist decisions are, well, what are the expectations of broader secular Israel? And I think that's really the divide. One of the, if you cut through all the policies, and I'm not sure that a Haredi approach calculates in that fashion for some of the reasons I just said. So it's a very thought-provoking parsha, and a very thought-provoking introduction to the parsha, and an extremely provocative Tana de B'Eliyahu. And I'm never here to clobber people with ideology, but I do want to raise important issues to think about as you begin to build your ideology, hopefully as a layer on top of your identity, because ideology can never become identity.